Halcyon Metrics was 3 minutes from the Nimbus core launch. The CEO, Renwick Dorsey, oversaw operations, ensuring everything was aligned for success. The team had invested millions in the cloud infrastructure manager, with high-profile investors and reporters present. As the countdown neared zero, critical systems failed, screens flickered, and the main display went black. Lars Petrov, a systems engineer, identified the issue as a recursive boot loop in the cache servers, which failed to trigger the mechanism. The load balancers also malfunctioned. Despite earlier diagnostics, no clear cause for the failure could be found. Attempts to resolve the problem were unsuccessful. Renwick, unfazed, asked if a controlled reboot was in progress, but the response was negative. The technical team's attempts to initiate a backup node were met with further issues, including unresponsive watchdog timers and unrelieved system overloads. The situation was critical. If the issue wasn't resolved immediately, the launch would fail, potentially jeopardizing the future of the company and its high-stakes product. The team's options were limited, and with the press and stakeholders on standby, the need for a solution was urgent. As the Halcyon Metrics team struggled to resolve the system failure, the situation grew more critical. The clock was ticking, and no immediate solution was in sight. Engineers scrambled through different troubleshooting steps, searching for any possible way to get the backup systems online. Their efforts to isolate the fault met with dead ends. There was frustration, but the complexity of the issue made it difficult to pinpoint the root cause. During this time, Truett Brinkley, who worked as a janitor at Halcyon, continued with her tasks. She was a part of the maintenance team, not involved in the technical operations, but her son Truett accompanied her. Truett, who was 10 years old, was absorbed in his own activities. He sat quietly in the corner, his attention fixed on his tablet. Though he wasn't part of the company, he spent much of his free time learning about technology. His interest was in coding and system architecture, subjects he had taught himself over time. Truett's tablet had a cracked screen, but it was still functional. His focus was unwavering as he continued to work on his own project, debugging code and solving problems as he always did. Odessa, while unaware of the technical issues unfolding in the control room, was familiar with her son's capabilities. Though she didn't understand the details of what he worked on, she knew Truett was adept at solving technical problems. Truett had always preferred to spend his time tinkering with electronics, debugging code, and building simple systems. His passion for these activities was evident even at a young age. His tablet was a tool he used to experiment, learn, and solve problems. Much like the engineers at Halcyon were trying to do with the malfunctioning system. As the engineers continued their efforts, the failure persisted. Attempts to reboot systems, restart core processes, and activate backup nodes all met with obstacles. The engineering team's frustration mounted. They were running out of time, and the options available were becoming fewer. The failure had gone beyond a simple glitch. It was a breakdown that none of the engineers could resolve. Discussions turned to theories, but none seemed to provide a clear path forward. Meanwhile, Truett noticed the growing activity around the control room. The increased movement and hushed conversations caught his attention. He glanced up from his tablet and observed the engineers and the urgency of the situation. He didn't fully grasp the scale of the problem, but he recognized something wasn't working, and the engineers weren't having much success. He stood up from his seat, leaving the corner where he had been sitting, and approached the control room. His movements were deliberate, calm, and focused. Truett wasn't overwhelmed by the chaos around him. Instead, he simply made his way to the area where the problem was being addressed. He wasn't part of the team, nor did he have any formal role in the company, but he understood the systems in a way that others did not. At first, no one took notice of Truett. He was a child, and children were not typically seen as contributors in such high-stakes situations. The team was preoccupied with troubleshooting the system, and Truett's presence was initially overlooked. However, Truett didn't falter. He approached the engineers and quietly observed the logs on the nearest console. Without drawing attention to himself, he pointed out the issue that had eluded the engineers. The load balancer wasn't releasing memory fast enough, causing a system loop. His observation was sharp and to the point. The issue was not with the hardware or the server itself, but with the load balancer's handling of memory, which was slowing down the system's response. Several engineers scoffed at Truett's diagnosis. They dismissed the idea that a child could understand something that they had not been able to resolve. However, Truett remained focused, unwavering in his belief that he had identified the problem. He didn't argue or try to explain himself further. Instead, he pointed to the error logs on the screen, showing them the precise issue. His explanation was concise and factual, and as the engineers looked at the logs, something unexpected happened. His diagnosis was correct. Kendra Silas, one of the senior engineers who had been working on the problem, leaned closer to the screen and examined the error message. She had been reviewing the logs herself, but Truett's observation added a new perspective. She quickly realized that the memory leak issue was the root cause. The system had been caught in a loop, failing to release memory as it processed incoming requests, which created the recurring errors. It wasn't the system's hardware or the infrastructure itself. It was a software configuration problem that needed to be addressed. Kendra and the other engineers were surprised. They hadn't considered the possibility of a memory leak being the source of the problem, especially not in such a direct and simple form. Truett's diagnosis was straightforward and clear, pointing out the memory overloads that had been stacking instances of corrupted data. As Kendra and the other engineers verified the issue on their consoles, they saw that Truett's suggestion was valid. His insight had cut through the complexity of the problem, offering a clear solution, though the engineers had been focused on more complex aspects of the system. Truett's observation had pointed them toward the root cause, something that had been missed due to the team's focus on other areas. His calm, methodical approach and deep understanding of system architecture had led him to the solution that the engineers had been searching for in vain. It was a solution that came not from years of formal education, but from Truett's self-knowledge and natural curiosity about technology. The engineers, now acknowledging the accuracy of Truett's diagnosis, began to implement the changes he suggested. The system was finally able to bypass the corrupt snapshot and purge the cache, resolving the memory overloads that had caused the system crash. The backup node came online, and the system's stability was restored. The countdown to launch resumed, and the technical crisis was averted. Thanks to an unlikely and unassuming solution, Truett's involvement in the resolution of the crisis was unexpected, and his ability to pinpoint the issue with clarity and precision surprised everyone in the room. His insight had made the difference between a successful launch and a failed one. As Truett explained the issue, the engineers moved quickly to implement the fix he suggested. Kendra, despite initial skepticism, began typing the solution into the system. She cross-checked the error logs and verified the details Truett had pointed out. As she worked, Lars Petrov, who had been focused on a different aspect of the problem, reviewed the data and came to the same conclusion. The memory leak caused by the load balancer's failure to release memory was the core issue, not hardware or server configuration problems. As initially suspected, the engineers followed the steps Truett outlined, bypassing the watchdog timer, isolating the corrupted node, and purging the faulty cache. The error logs matched his diagnosis, confirming that the system had been locked in a recursive loop, which had prevented the failover from triggering. This was the critical issue that had been overlooked in the earlier troubleshooting attempts. With the system's failover mechanism now functioning correctly, the engineers began to regain control over the system. Renwick, observing the unfolding events, asked how Truett had come to such a conclusion when the team of highly paid engineers had been unable to resolve the issue. Truett calmly explained the logic behind his solution, pointing out that the recursive error had caused a memory overload, and the failover was repeatedly failing due to the corrupted snapshot. His explanation, though simple, was grounded in clear reasoning, with no exaggeration or unnecessary detail. As the engineers implemented Truett's solution, the system's stability gradually improved. The corrupted node was isolated, and the cache was purged. The backup node successfully came online, stabilizing the system and allowing the launch sequence to continue. Within moments, the failover was fully functional, and the system had returned to its normal state. The launch sequence resumed, with only seconds to spare before the scheduled go-live. This sequence of events demonstrated that the solution had been deceptively simple, but effective. While the engineers had been focused on more complex issues, Truett's ability to identify the root cause, with clear and concise reasoning, had provided the key to resolving the failure. The system had been restored, and the launch proceeded without further issues. A mere minute before the critical deadline, the resolution came swiftly, not just because the system had been fixed, but because the engineers had quickly acknowledged the accuracy of Truett's diagnosis. They realized that the issue was not as complex as it had initially seemed. The problem had been a fundamental one and overlooked detail that, once identified, could be corrected efficiently. In that sense, the issue had been less about the technicalities of the system and more about recognizing the right solution at the right time. Renwick, though still processing the situation, recognized that the issue had been resolved. The engineers, who had initially doubted Truett's input, were now accepting the results of his fix. The system was stable, and the launch had been salvaged just in time. However, the events had made it clear that the solution had come from an unexpected source: a 10-year-old boy, who had demonstrated a depth of understanding that surpassed the expectations of everyone in the room. Truett's approach, grounded in his own experiences and independent learning, had provided the breakthrough. The engineers, who were highly skilled and experienced in their field, had missed the issue, while Truett, with his fresh perspective and technical curiosity, had solved it in a matter of minutes. His ability to see past the surface problem and identify the deeper issue had made all the difference. The system's stability was restored, and the launch proceeded as planned. but the engineers and Renwick were left to reflect on what had just transpired. Truett's involvement in solving the problem had proven that technical ability and insight could come from anyone, regardless of age or experience. It was a stark reminder that sometimes the most obvious solutions are the ones that are hardest to see, especially when the focus is on complexity rather than simplicity. As the engineers verified that the system was functioning as expected, and the backup systems were stable, the moment marked a shift in how the team viewed the problem. What had once seemed like an insurmountable issue had been resolved through clear, simple reasoning and an understanding of the system's underlying mechanics. The launch was back on track, and the system was ready for the final stages of deployment, all thanks to a fresh perspective and a simple, yet accurate diagnosis. Following the resolution of the system failure and the successful restoration of the launch, the focus in the room shifted from crisis management to reflection. The engineers confirmed that the system was stable and the necessary processes had been restored. The launch, which had seemed on the verge of collapse, was now back on track, and the immediate technical concerns were resolved. However, a new issue emerged, one that was not related to the technical aspects of the launch but rather to the identity and value of the person responsible for the fix. Renwick Dorsey, the CEO, turned his attention to Truett. His initial reaction to the child's involvement had been one of disbelief, followed by surprise. But with the system now stable and the crisis averted, the implications of what had just happened began to settle in. Truett, a 10-year-old boy, had single-handedly identified the core issue that had eluded a team of highly trained engineers. The realization that the solution had come from someone outside the formal structure of the company, and from someone with no official role, made Renwick reconsider how talent was recognized and developed within Halcyon metrics. Renwick approached Truett, seeking an explanation. He asked, "How did you know that fix would work?" Truett responded with clarity, stating that he had recognized the same error from a simulation he had worked on months before. His answer was straightforward and devoid of unnecessary complexity. There was no boastfulness or attempt to seek recognition. His response focused purely on the facts and the problem at hand. This conversation led Renwick to an offer that would likely be considered a golden opportunity for anyone in the tech field, particularly for someone so young. He extended an invitation for Truett to join Halcyon Metrics under a mentorship program. The offer included access to Halcyon's development labs, early career placement, and direct guidance from the company's lead engineers. It was a pathway into the tech industry, with resources and opportunities that many professionals would eagerly pursue. However, Trudeau rejected the offer without hesitation. He responded simply, "I like working on my own projects. I don't need permission." His answer was direct and confident, reflecting his independent mindset. Truett's decision to decline Renwick's offer wasn't based on a lack of appreciation for the opportunity, but rather a clear sense of what he valued: freedom to pursue his own interests and projects, without being tied down by corporate expectations or constraints. Renwick's response to the rejection was one of surprise and, perhaps, frustration. As a businessman, he was accustomed to seeing talent within the context of formal structures. For someone so young, with no professional training or formal education, to not only solve a critical problem but also turn down an offer of mentorship from a leading tech company was unexpected. The fact that Truett's decision was based on personal values, rather than a desire for recognition or career advancement, challenged Renwick's assumptions about how talent should be nurtured and developed. Renwick's initial discomfort was rooted in the disruption of the status quo. In the corporate world, there is an expectation that success and recognition come through formal education, experience, and adherence to established pathways. Truett's decision undermined this expectation by showing that technical brilliance could emerge outside of traditional systems. It raised questions about the ways in which the tech industry and business in general values talent and whether it should be redefined to accommodate more unconventional paths. Although Renwick did not publicly express his feelings about Truett's rejection, it was clear that he had been confronted with a new understanding of talent. His focus on formal structures and mentorship programs had been challenged by a child who had no interest in fitting into those molds. The rejection wasn't a blow to Renwick personally, but it was an indication that the conventional approach to developing talent might not be the only way forward. He had to reconsider how to engage with individuals like Truett, who valued independence and self-directed learning over structured corporate programs. Truett's decision also highlighted the contrast between corporate ambitions and personal integrity. Renwick's offer was driven by the desire to harness Truett's abilities for the benefit of Halcyon Metrics. It was an opportunity that seemed mutually beneficial, but Truett saw it differently. For him, the opportunity was not about gaining access to corporate resources or advancing his career. It was about preserving his autonomy and continuing to work on projects that excited him personally, without external pressures or obligations. This stance emphasized Truett's deep understanding of his own worth and priorities, something that many others, especially those within the corporate world, might struggle to grasp. In the aftermath of Truett's rejection, Renwick's thoughts turned inward. He had made an offer that would have provided substantial resources and opportunities, yet it had been declined without any negotiation. This situation forced Renwick to confront a reality that many in his position might prefer to ignore. Sometimes, the most valuable talent does not follow the traditional paths or conform to corporate expectations. Sometimes, it operates outside of the system, creating its own opportunities and choosing its own direction. Truett had shown that brilliance does not always require institutional backing. It can thrive in environments that are free from constraints and formalities. Truett's rejection, though surprising to Renwick, also shifted the focus from corporate recognition to individual self-determination. It became clear that Truett wasn't motivated by fame or success in the traditional sense. He wasn't seeking to be part of the halcyon machine. Instead, he was focused on creating and learning on his own terms. This distinction between external validation and internal drive was at the heart of Truett's decision and set the stage for his future choices. Renwick, though taken aback by Truett's response, began to reconsider how Halcyon could approach talent development in the future. The encounter with Truett had revealed that not all potential could be captured through mentorship programs or structured career paths. In some cases, the best course of action might be to allow individuals the freedom to explore their own interests, free from corporate constraints. The following day, Halcyon Metrics' public relations team moved swiftly to reshape the narrative of the launch crisis. The company released statements portraying the event as a flawless success, emphasizing the speed with which the technical team had resolved the issue. The media, eager for a positive angle, accepted this version without question, presenting it as a minor glitch that had been quickly corrected. However, the true story, one that had unfolded behind closed doors, began to leak within technical circles. A blurry cell phone video from the control room started circulating, showing Truett calmly diagnosing the problem and explaining the system error to the engineers. The video gained traction quickly, first in niche tech forums, and then on larger platforms like Reddit. The story of the 10-year-old who had saved Halcyon's launch captured the attention of developers, engineers, and technology enthusiasts. As the video spread, discussions in various online communities grew, and soon, articles appeared on tech blogs recounting how Truett, with no formal education or corporate experience, had identified the issue that the Halcyon team had missed. This unexpected rise to online fame did not go unnoticed by educational institutions. A charter school in Flagstaff reached out to Truett, offering him a place in an accelerated STEM program. The offer came with the promise of access to resources, mentorship, and opportunities to further his talents in technology. The school's invitation was an acknowledgement of Truett's abilities, something that could open doors in a formal educational system. However, Truett did not respond to this or any other inquiries from the media. He continued to focus on his own personal projects, remaining uninterested in the external validation or opportunities being offered. Truett's decision not to take up any formal offers reflected his independent approach to learning and growth. While his talent had been recognized, he chose not to follow the typical path of academic or corporate advancement. He was not interested in joining the tech industry on its terms. Instead, he preferred to continue exploring technology in his own way, working on personal projects that he found interesting. His rejection of these external opportunities underscored his desire for autonomy and his belief in pursuing his own passions without constraints. Despite the lack of official recognition from Halcyon, the tech community took note of Truett's contribution. Halcyon, eager to avoid acknowledging the failure or crediting an outsider, continued to present the event as a success orchestrated by their internal team. However, the growing online presence of Truett's name began to shift the focus. He had gained recognition for solving a problem that the team of highly paid engineers had struggled with. The fact that he was a child, with no formal training, made the story even more compelling. People in the industry began to view him as a symbol of raw talent, unconfined by traditional structures. Truett's legacy in the tech world was not built on the formal recognition he received, but rather on his ability to solve complex problems on his own terms. The fact that he had already built his own path, separate from the expectations placed on him by others, became a defining characteristic. He was not interested in titles or degrees. Instead, he valued knowledge and problem-solving. This independence was what set him apart from others in the industry who followed more conventional routes and smaller, more specialized communities. Truett's name became synonymous with innovation and independent thinking. Discussions about him in forums and on social media platforms revolved around his ability to see patterns and solutions that others missed. These conversations, while not making it to mainstream media outlets, carried significant weight in the tech community. The people who mattered, those in positions to recognize true potential, began to see Truett for what he was, a self-taught genius who could think outside the conventional framework of corporate and academic institutions. Truett's story, while largely ignored by Halcyon, continued to evolve in the background. Educational institutions, tech companies, and developers began to reach out to him in more informal ways. It was no longer about joining a corporation or following a predefined educational path. Truett had already established his value, and it was recognized by those who understood that talent doesn't always come in the form of formal credentials. His work, his ability to identify and solve complex problems, and his focus on projects that interested him, these were the things that mattered. The tech industry had always prided itself on fostering innovation and breaking the mold, but actions highlighted that the system didn't always work in favor of those who truly had the potential to push the industry forward. By choosing not to follow the expected paths of career development and education, Truett forced a reconsideration of what it meant to be a part of the tech world. It was not just about climbing the corporate ladder or earning a degree. Instead, it was about the ability to innovate, to solve problems, and to pursue knowledge in ways that felt true to the individual. Truett's name eventually became well known in the niche corners of the tech community, but he never sought public recognition. He stayed focused on his work, content to learn and create on his own terms. The legacy he left behind wasn't one of fame, but of authenticity and independence in a world that often values credentials over talent. For Truett's success wasn't measured by external validation, but by the ability to think critically, solve problems, and remain true to his passions, regardless of societal expectations. Halcyon, for its part, never publicly acknowledged Truett's role in the success of the launch. The company continued to focus on the narrative of overcoming a minor technical hiccup, ensuring that their brand image remained intact. But in the tech community, where recognition often comes not from corporate endorsement but from peers and fellow innovators, Truett had already made a name for himself, one built on skill, intelligence, and a refusal to conform.